waxing down our surfboards and loading up our traps. Tell the teacher we're shooting, we're never coming back. I've got a gun rack in my Chevy for when the surf and the flak get heavy, and we'll have fun with our guns till our lifeguard takes our ammo away. First wave, don't get tired. Second wave, aim higher. Third wave.
We have clearance, Clarence.
Roger, Roger. What's our vector, Victor? You ever seen a grown man naked?
It's an entirely different kind of flying, altogether.
It's an entirely different kind of flying.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Nice beaver.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Directors Club podcast. I am Jim Laskowski. Today, I have a pair, a couplet, a twain, a twosome, a duo of delightful podcasters on hand to deconstruct the art of parody as we tackle the work of Zucker. Abrams. Zucker. I could not be more excited to welcome to the show returning guests, Sean Dwyer. Hello, Sean.
Hi, Jim. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's an honor. And, of course, the king of comedy himself, Frank Knezich.
Hey, what's going on, Jim? Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you guys both on once again. Sean, you were on way back when for the Ridley Scott episode, which was a lot of fun, especially bringing up Blade Runner. And I remember vividly when somebody wrote into your guys' show complaining about our Blade Runner review. I was like, oh, that's very nice of them to write to Film Junk and, give my show a little plug by saying how much they didn't like it.
Gotta love those junkers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I happen to be one of them. Oh, Frank, it's great to have you back on as well. You were on for the Alexander Payne episode.
Yeah, it seems like so long ago.
Oh, right? It's crazy when I look back and look at older episodes and go, wow, that's either like it was yesterday or 9 years ago.
Yeah, I remember exactly where I was sitting, what I was wearing. It was a wonderful evening.
Yeah, I think I was drinking Schlitz in Grand Rapids, Michigan at the time.
Nice.
Yeah, and my kitty kept coming into the closet where I was recording. But Sean, did they ever come up with a nickname for you?
There's a few. Marquis to Mindfuck is one. What else is there? Earl of Editorializing.
Nothing's stuck yet. Like, nothing's solid.
Yeah. So I know both of you are huge fans of this team of comedy filmmakers. And much like when I talked about David Wayne with Goon, a.k.a. Corey Pierce, I also wanted to include some other points of discussion that we'll get into later in the show, of course, since whenever you're talking about comedy, I don't necessarily want it to be a series of statements from everybody simply going, well, I found this scene to be funny, but this other scene not so much. And, talking about comedy can be tricky to where we all come at it with different senses of humor, obviously.
Well, we could point directly to Nothing But Trouble, which I give a 5-star, probably the funniest movie I've ever seen, and Jim gives, I think, a begrudging half-star on Letterboxd.
Of course, Frank is also known as the Letterboxd Police, and he checks in on your star ratings.
Not policing anything, just observing. Observe and report.
Of course.
Observe and report.
Oh, nice reference there.
But
Yeah.
it is an interesting example because, as Frank has stated before, I don't know if Dan Aykroyd has really said recently how he feels about it, but we get the impression he's kind of ashamed, he's not really proud of it, and I would make that comparison with Top Secret, one of the films we're going to be talking about.
Yeah,
with,
and
I
don't want to spoil this already, but there's a direct Nothing But Trouble and Top Secret connection.
Oh, really?
I think I know what that could be. Does it have to do with the producer, perhaps?
No, that is another connection that Robert K. Weiss produced Nothing But Trouble and produced several of these movies, but it's specific. And I mean, I'll talk about it more. I'll just tease it for now, but when we get a bit more into spoof and parody, I'll bring it up there as how the humor in these movies can work on multiple levels.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, but the reason why I think it's just as important to discuss comedy on this podcast in particular, because, I mean, a lot of people will come to expect an episode on, Godard or Fellini, and, those episodes will definitely come in the future. But I really do think comedy should be taken every bit as seriously as a drama or a horror film. Because making somebody laugh is not an easy task, and it's often under-recognized when it comes to awards and award shows. So, I mean, I can remember being pleasantly surprised when Kevin Kline actually won Best Supporting Actor for Fish Called Wanda, but it's pretty slim pickings when it comes to recognition of comedy as an art form in terms of award shows and whatnot. Unless maybe you're talking about the Golden Globes. They do recognize it, obviously. But
the musicals always win all the awards. And that's they share a category. So,
well, and then you have. I know we've had debates on Film Junk several times about comedy versus horror, and just actually how similar they are in terms of getting respect, or people being afraid to commit to being a comedy or a horror if they want to have prestige, or they're worried about awards and stuff like that. They'll never say, with this movie as a comedy, they'll say, oh, it's a drama with some comedy.
A dramedy.
It's a thriller, a scary thriller. No one just straight up says Silence of the Lambs is a horror movie. But I think even lately, I know you posted, Letterboxd, please. I know you posted a list today of top comedies since the year 2000. And I would agree with most of those choices, but I do feel like in the last, let's say, 16 years, the comedy scene has been pretty weak in general. Like, I think most of the funniest stuff I've seen has been TV. Like, there's a lot of misses in theaters for comedy lately.
And it's all because Abrams Zucker are no longer, they're not present anymore. They're gone.
Well, I've read that David Zucker in particular, he's working on something. I can't remember off the top of my head what it is, but he is calling it, I believe, a film noir kind of spoof. Which I think that would be interesting too. I mean, I feel like, didn't Steve Martin kind of do that early on? I mean, that was more of like a detective parody, if I recall. It was Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid early on.
Right. I mean, Naked Gun kind of does that as well, to an extent. But it's interesting because, I was going to mention this in what we watched, although I haven't watched it recently, but Angie Tribeca,
that's
a TV series, has kind of brought back this form of spoof that we're going to be talking about, and it's almost like if the ZAZ team got back together and did one of these, I think there could be a revival going on.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I feel like Steve Carell, I think, is responsible, along with some other people, of course, for putting that show together. And it's clear that I think they were just as disappointed as I was that Police Squad only lasted 6 episodes and wanted to, make their own stamp on that sort of style. And that's certainly a show that I feel is very hit and miss. But we'll get, we can sort of touch upon their influence too later on. I mean, we sort of, talked about the subjectivity of humor in general. And I one example that comes to mind for me, even early on as maybe a 10-year-old, I want to say, I thought Mel Brooks's Young Frankenstein was almost a perfect example of a parody comedy. But I don't know why, because both my dad and I were huge fans of Mel Brooks and this type of humor, but we both were kind of shocked at how we didn't find Spaceballs very funny at the time it came out on video.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, Spaceballs comes up frequently among people I talk to as one of their first movies they remember being hilarious. So.
And it's weird. When I think of, I love Spaceballs. At work, we quote it almost daily. And I would say that it's not even the references that I find funny in Spaceballs. It's more the original stuff and the, just performances, like Rick Moranis' performance and stuff like that. I don't think it's necessarily a Star Wars gag. I don't laugh at it because it's a Star Wars gag. It's just the humor that they created in a Star Wars-like universe that I like.
I can see that. I don't know if it was. I can't remember like my specific criticisms of it. I actually wanted to rewatch it in time for this, but I didn't. I kind of want to go back and just rewatch it just for the heck of it, because I just remember it being a lot of testicle jokes. And, kind of scatological humor that, I don't know, I always found Mel Brooks to be kind of a notch above that a little bit. I mean, obviously, Young Frankenstein is kind of a more refined homage / parody film of the original Frankenstein, whereas Blazing Saddles definitely had more, let's say, vulgarity, I guess, Mm-hmm.
Definitely got the fart jokes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I
low brow, I should say. Yeah.
I would say I was surprised by, because I mostly watched Naked Gun movies and Airplane when I was younger, and how many sexual, straight up sexual jokes and things there are in these movies. Rewatching them that I had forgotten about and not really picked up on. So
Nice beaver.
that stuff went over my head as a kid, but I was really surprised. And one other thing. Talking about TV and where the Zuckers could fit, one show that I thought could have used this style of humor more or worked more in the realm of spoof or parody was The Muppets on ABC, where they were taking the aesthetic of The Office and all these other shows and applying it.
Why do we always compare?
But I don't think they went far enough spoofing that genre and using it as parody. They actually just tried to be one of those shows rather than maybe pointing out the tropes. I think they tried a bit, but that's the type of humor I would expect from the Muppets, and I think they should have pushed that more and at least maybe tried to carve out a niche as a show like that with the Muppets cast.
That's a great point, because, I mean, the original incarnation of the Muppets was very clever and spoofy and full of great visual sight gags and puns and a lot of cleverness. I didn't even catch up with the recent wave, even though I'm a big fan, just because I kept hearing underwhelming reviews of it. So I kind of didn't want to ruin my vision of the Muppets. But I still don't know. I hear there were good episodes and bad episodes, but I would imagine that they should tap more into that style. But it's sad to hear that they didn't.
Yeah, maybe the later episodes did. I only watched the first few, but it seems like a nice match.
Yeah, well, for sure. And I also value your opinion on modern comedy, Frank, because I know that you go out of your way to see something like Bad Moms in hopes of having a positive experience.
Well, as I've talked about on Film Junk, I still have a shred of hope for any comedy, especially when it's poorly reviewed, that... people just didn't get it. It's working outside the box, and unfortunately, most comedies that are poorly reviewed now are working in the box and working poorly inside the box, and that's usually the case for a negative review, where in the past, a comedy that people just didn't get or was maybe ahead of its time or pushing boundaries, people would give negative reviews, but there was actually something great there. But that doesn't seem to happen too often these days.
Yeah. No, that's definitely true. I'm wondering, Sean, too, since I know on Letterboxd you include the Naked Gun movies as all-time favorites. Is that accurate, or is that more meant to be kind of a joke?
It's kind of a joke. I mean, I gave the first one a 4.5 out of 5 on this recent rewatch. It had been quite a while since I'd seen it in its entirety. But, I mean, it was kind of a joke, but, as I revisit some of these things, and even, watching Angie Tribeca, I realized that I admire this kind of humor. I think it's more clever than some people give it credit for. And, yeah, they're hit and miss. All these movies are hit and miss, and they have jokes that don't work, but part of the fun is just what's going to come next. You don't know. It could be hilarious. It could be completely terrible, but... then you're on to the next joke, and I think that's what I like about them.
Yeah, well, I made it my duty to watch all 4 of Sean's top 4 films on Letterboxd for this podcast, which were the Naked Gun trilogy and Wrongfully Accused, which that to me is the snarkiest little injection into that top 4, but it's okay, Sean. There is, in my opinion, a masterpiece level scene in Wrongfully Accused, but the rest of the movie's trash.
Interesting.
Yeah, I'm more in the middle on that one. I think what Pat Proft is responsible for Wrongfully Accused, and
Yes.
I believe they pretty much co-wrote a lot of even the earlier Police Squad episodes, or the second Naked Gun, if I recall. So, I mean, they obviously all work together as a collaborative team, and Pat Proft that's like their solo project with Wrongfully Accused.
Exactly. Yeah. And Basketball is David Zucker's solo
Yeah.
project.
Which I didn't get a chance to revisit, but I certainly remember liking it when I saw it.
Yeah, I think the other thing we were just talking about in terms of some are hit and miss, the jokes, you also, the thing that's great about them is they work within so many different types of humor. Someone who might not like physical humor as much, there will be like deadpan humor as well, sight gags, just legitimately funny lines, wordings, turns of phrase. Like there's so many different types of humor that, I mean, I think the tagline or one of the advertising things for Naked Gun was like, there's no chance you can't laugh at this movie at least once, or something to that effect. And I think that's the case. Like no matter what your style of humor, I think there is something within it that works in these movies, at least one or two jokes.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, it's also interesting because I even went to see what Siskel and Ebert's take was on the original Naked Gun movie, and I think it was Siskel, you have to have the mindset of a 6-year-old to enjoy the sophomoric humor, which I don't know how I feel about, because I do think that it takes a level of intelligence to actually construct some of these jokes. They're not just people running into things for the entire film.
Yeah. Yeah, I almost think someone who might find them extremely funny are comedy writers themselves, like trying to play with tropes or setups and taking them one level further, and like a setup that surprises you that you didn't realize was a setup in some of these jokes. I mean, there's lots of that stuff here.
Yeah, Lord and Miller in particular, I know that they're huge fans. You can even just watch the Lego movie to sort of get a sense of the Zucker brothers' influence later on.
Yeah, that's true. I was just going to say, like, puns in general. Like, there's puns in these movies. It's definitely a key component of them. And that's always... Puns are always slammed, like, I love puns. I love just throwing them out there. Like, we do a lot of puns on Film Junk just to amuse ourselves. But there are people out there that you throw out a pun, even kind of ironically, and they're like, "Ugh,
yep,
why? That wasn't funny." And it's like, what? Like, just lighten up, man. Like, it doesn't. I don't get it.
Where's your sense of humor? I mean, I understand that 100%. I'm fairly convinced that the reason my co-host Patrick left the show was because of my. It was like Tourette's with me and puns. I would often just spit them out. Much to his chagrin, and get a lot of eye roll. I could actually hear listeners' eyes rolling when I would do a pun. But hey, sometimes you got to amuse yourself. That's what Jay does a lot too.
Definitely.
Just be you. Just be you, Jimmy.
So there isn't that rush, like when you see a Sam Raimi movie and you see the camera bust through a door. It's not a CGI door. It's an actual door that they bust through.
And when you see Geddy Lee, you also get a rush. I was reading up a little bit on spoofs and how they flourished during the 1920s, because a lot of people even consider comedy masters like Buster Keaton to sort of tweak Hollywood. But when I think of someone like Charlie Chaplin, I think of him more as a satirist with something like The Great Dictator, and less of like imitating a certain style, but just doing political commentary against satire with his portrayal of Hitler and like The Great Dictator. But there are some people who consider spoofs to have originated then. And then they reappeared, obviously, with Mel Brooks, Woody Allen, and then Zucker. So, it's interesting to think of how the idea of spoof in its inception started out in the silent film era, and then there was a little bit of a down period, and then it came back again in the late 70s, early 80s, and then maybe a little bit of a down period again, and then, maybe the scary movies were also a reason that this reignited.
And then they've kind of reignited since Scary Movie. I know you had. Did you watch Superhero Movie?
Oh God, yes. Unfortunately, I did.
I have not watched those, but then there's the epic movies, all these terrible spoofs that are just like operate. That's the difference. You can tell the difference just seeing the trailers for those. The level that they're operating at gag wise, like there's no layers at all. It is just a direct reference or copying. There's no build up or setup of jokes. It's just the most base level references and comedy you could possibly do.
Yeah, and even though I would say that I don't have a good memory of the first couple Scary Movies, but I did go back and got Scary Movie 3 simply because I knew David Zucker directed it, and it had some big laughs in it. Definitely not consistent, but the thing that stood out to me was what you mentioned with just throwing in a pop culture reference just for the reference. And that would be Michael Jackson, showing up in a kid's bedroom in the middle of the night, which just rubs me the wrong way in general. I know anything is ripe for humor, but I just feel like just throwing him in, having him moonwalk for a gag does not work at all.
It has to be Leslie Nielsen moonwalking for it to be a gag.
Yeah. I wish I could have gone back and watched Repossessed, because that was one when I saw it as a kid I really liked, and I wonder how that holds up.
I watched it last year or the year before, I think, and I mean it's pure nostalgia. It's really not that funny at all, but I loved Repossessed, and we would watch it at like sleepovers and stuff all the time. It had nudity, and it was weird. I don't know. It's not very funny though, not at all.
Yeah, I didn't think so. I didn't think it would hold up, but I don't even know who did that film. It seems like it was an outlier in terms of that the parody genre at the time. But
it's weird how Leslie Nielsen kind of took off and became the front man for all these, and the Abrams Zucker team kind of broke apart, and then nobody cared if they were involved anymore. It's just if Leslie Nielsen was in it, then hey, it's a legit spoof. We got to go see this.
Yeah, we should probably run down some of these Leslie Nielsen spoofs.
Sure, go ahead.
In this prime era after The Naked Gun, so there was Dracula, Dead and Loving It.
Mel Brooks. Speaking of Mel Brooks,
yeah, Spy Hard, Mr. Magoo, kind of. I don't know.
I never saw that.
I saw Spy Hard in theaters. I remember that. 2001: A Space Travesty.
Oh wow! Yeah. I don't remember that at all. Was that straight to video?
I would not be surprised. No. He plays Richard Dick Dix. Men with Brooms, which we all fondly remember. I know Sean does. Scary Movie 4, superhero movie, and Stan Helsing. I mean, it just... Ooh. That's a more recent one, but I can't help. I clicked on it, and it's Leslie Nielsen in this, like, wearing... He's dressed up as a girl, and it looks absolutely hilarious. Even though I'm sure it's terrible, but he can get a laugh like no other, I would say.
Frank, did you ever see Mafia?
Jane Austen's Mafia? Yes.
Jane Austen's Mafia, that's what it was.
I have the poster, and I saw it in theaters. I do remember the one.
That's
one
not
scene,
Leslie Nielsen.
No, but I think it is. Is it Abrams that did that?
Yeah,
one?
I think so. Yeah, and Lloyd Bridges is in it.
Yeah, and one of them worked. Which, if it's Lloyd Bridges, I'm guessing it's Abrams because he worked with him on Hot Shots, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, Mafia. The only scene I remember really laughing at was, it is Abrams. The casino. They go into a casino, and I think they're parodying Casino, and it's like all these ridiculous games like that they're betting on. And I think one of them was War, and now War is actually a casino game.
Oh my God.
you just try to beat the dealer's high card, and I mean, so the world has devolved into parody. So it's great social commentary there too from Jane Austen's Mafia.
Yeah, they're way ahead of their time.
Mm-hmm.
I only bring that one up because I remember seeing that one in the theater, and it was a basically empty theater. Didn't laugh once, and I just remember thinking, okay, this is pretty much dead. Like the spoof genre is officially dead at this point.
Well, even David Zucker himself, I forgot what article it was. He actually just feels that this type of comedy is not fresh anymore. You know, I feel like we live in a time right now where, obviously, politically speaking, you know, you look at a show like Veep in terms of political satire, and that working so effectively. But, you know, at the same time, we do have Angie Tribeca that's kind of picking up where Naked Gun left off. So, I mean, it's definitely possible to continue on in their tradition, but it doesn't feel as fresh as it did way back when they started. So we can sort of go to the beginning here. Zucker, Abrams, Zucker.
Yeah.
These three directors gonna make you laugh.
Yeah.
I think they're funny, you know that's a fact.
Yeah.
Even Weird Al thinks they are legends, yeah.
Yes. Leon's getting larger.
Naked Gun. Yes, they did Airplane and then Top Secret. Leslie Nielsen is hilarious. Comedy genius, always inventive.
The Tower. Rapunzel. Rapunzel.
Call me Shirley. Zucker, Abrams, Zucker. Nice Beaver. Zucker, Abrams, Zucker. Funny wordplay. Zucker, Abrams, Zucker. Visual gags. Zucker, Abrams, Zucker. Many classic clips. Zucker, Abrams, Zucker. Come laugh at this. Zucker, Abrams, Zucker.
It looks like a big Tylenol.
They started out as basically three buddies who just had a theater company in the back of a bookstore in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and it was called the Kentucky Fried Theater. And so John Landis just happens to be in town. I mean, he's a Chicago boy, so he was just hanging out in Milwaukee and saw their show and pretty much went up to them right afterwards and said, hey, you guys need to adapt these sketches into some kind of movie because it's freaking hilarious. And they had no idea what to do, so they basically asked Landis, can you help us out with that? Show us how to write a script, show us how to put a scene together, and basically adapt their brand of humor into what eventually became
The Kentucky Fried Movie. The Kentucky Fried Movie heralds the return to traditional values.
I'm not wearing any pants. Film at 11.
It is a film of heartfelt passion, a great love story.
Oh, take me to the drive-in. Prove you love me.
technically their first successful endeavor, you would say. Which, again, it's very hit and miss. I remember seeing that at a very young age and actually preferring a variant on Kentucky Fried Movie, something called Amazon Women on the Moon, which I don't think the Abrams-Zucker team had anything to do with at all. I just happened to, at the time...
Landis was involved, though, wasn't he?
Yeah, Landis and Joe Dante.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm assuming a lot of other writers and possibly Robert K. Weiss again. But I remember finding Amazon Women on the Moon to be a little bit funnier, but at the same time, there's no denying in Kentucky Fried Movie you see that the Kung Fu parody, and that's exactly what eventually became their brand of humor, really. Yeah,
I just watched this for the first time this week, and was a little disappointed, I guess. I didn't find it that funny. It definitely is dated. For me, it's just more interesting to see where they started. They kind of remind me a little bit of UHF in the sense that it almost feels like you're supposed to be sort of channel surfing and you get a bunch of different things. Although I guess it's more structured, like you're seeing trailers and then you get a feature presentation, which I found strange that the actual Kung Fu movie is as long as it is.
Yeah, right? I thought so too.
Dragged a bit. And it really kind of just played things straight in a lot of ways. But there were some moments in there that were funny. The interview where the boom mic is like hitting the guy in the head and just moving around and doing crazy things. Like, that's an example of them taking something and you think, okay, here's a laugh that was good once, and now you're going to run into the ground. But then they keep like just adding things that are so crazy that it becomes funny again.
Right.
And so, yeah, I appreciated that.
Yeah.
I think what else was funny in that movie?
I didn't get to watch it, unfortunately.
Well, the thing I notice about it in particular is the fact that I can always tell when John Landis is behind something, because man, does he love boobs. I mean, he relishes them at times. I mean, there's that, I believe it's at the end with the porno, like the interactive porno kind of a thing going on.
Right.
I seen that at a very young age. Made me feel weird. And even in an Amazon Women on the Moon, there's like a sketch of a naked woman walking around just a mall full of people. And it's funny because, like, even as a kid, I went, you know what? I bet John Landis directed that particular sketch, and I had to see the credits to confirm, and I was right. It just seems like he loves showing boobs in his movies. But I feel the same way. It's very hit and miss, Kentucky Fried Movie. There's some stuff in it that it almost feels like a joke a kid in elementary school would make with their first attempt to make a movie or something. Like, it's that bad, but then some of it is actually really funny. So yeah, and after the success of that, because they were able to make a little bit of money through the success of Kentucky Fried Movie, they basically had a big break, and they gained credibility and decided to venture out to come up with something entirely their own. So in 1980, Airplane came out and was a huge success.
Or is it entirely their own?
That's true, because you certainly look at the source of inspiration for Airplane. I mean, the way they sort of decided to even come up with this concept was they were watching a movie late at night, probably stoned, and it happened to be 0 Hour. Mm-hmm. And they basically decided to imitate that movie to the point where, even in that film, they say the line, "Surely you can't be serious," but then you don't get the pun that, or, the wordplay that comes after that in Airplane. So it's just interesting to see, which is why I sent you guys that link to sort of go back and see how much they borrowed for their Mad Magazine kind of approach to humor for Airplane. What was your first experience, and how did you feel about it on a rewatch?
Well, I don't think I've seen it that many times before. I think I watched it a few times as a kid or a teenager, and I always liked it. I think just as a base love of comedy, that there was stuff I laughed at. I didn't have too much affection, but this is the first time I've watched it in a long time, and I was surprised at how much it held up for me, actually. Even thinking right out of the gate, the announcers fighting and turning announcements into an argument over abortion, like that's that made me laugh, and I think there's a lot of really good performances, and there was a lot, like the stuff with I don't know how I did, because I had seen it on so many re-released DVD covers, had forgotten the bit about autopilot and all that stuff, which I actually think, like, it honestly, I think it's pretty good still. It's not that bad, and I like the pick the wrong week to quit.
I picked the wrong week to quit smoking.
That still works for me. I don't know. I still laughed a lot, and I was surprised. And in all honesty, compared to more recent parody or spoof movies, I was surprised that, like, I didn't feel like it was going for humor constantly either. And I think Top Secret is an example of this too, where they obviously have jokes, but it's not an onslaught to a level where it's annoying. I think
there's some downtime.
Yeah, in between, and there is like some just basic buildup of script, and maybe for them an inside joke is they're literally copying the movie. But I mean, you get the scene that's straight out of 0 Hour where, not that I've seen 0 Hour, I just saw the clip you sent, and where he's asking the kid if he's ever been in a cockpit, and now this one almost turns into some weird
I know, it's
pedophile
weird.
Jokes going on with the guy being... I mean, I love that stuff. So, I don't know, I just... there is stuff that's probably pushing it as to what is acceptable now, but I almost find that refreshing with the movie, and I don't think it goes too far that it's, at least for me, it's not offensive.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. Okay, Sean, what are your thoughts on this comedy classic?
I like it. I know that it's kind of held up as the best of the Abrams Zucker films, and it's one that, I mean, it says right on the Blu-ray that I have that, one of the funniest films of all time. I think it won some poll or something, and I don't remember if there was like a study. I feel like there was a study done where they actually looked at
I remember that.
number of laughs or something weird like that, where it came out on top. So it has like these, it has this level of prestige, and I think it is very good. I just, it's not my favorite of their films. It's not the first one I saw either. But rewatching it, there's still some great stuff. For me, the stuff that stands out is all the wordplay. Obviously you've got just, the Don't Call Me Shirley.
It's the Vector Victor.
Clearance. That's great. What is it? Where he says it's a different kind of flying altogether, and then they say it, in unison. Things like that, I still think are very clever and funny, and sure, probably a lot of people would watch it now and just roll their eyes at it. But it is interesting thinking about, as Frank was kind of referring to the downtime in some of their movies. Like, some people do credit them as being good at working within the genres they're parodying, to the point where when there's not jokes, you are still kind of invested in the film and the story and the characters. And I don't know if I totally buy that, but I will say at least I'm not bored when there's no jokes. Like, there's still, like with Airplane, I think a big part of it is just playing it straight, right? Like,
yeah.
Like they are parodying the disaster films and the airport movies, but like I think knowing that some of the stuff comes from 0 Hour actually kind of makes it funnier, that they just literally take the lines and throw them back at you, and they play as funny in this context. So, and
it almost plays as a super inside joke for someone who's seen 0 Hour.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, and I know that, a huge reason why this movie initially, a lot of people were skeptical about it, was because of the casting. I know the studio initially wanted comedians, quote unquote, or funny people at the time, like they wanted to cast Dom DeLuise in here, as opposed to guys like Leslie Nielsen, who was very obscure at the time, Peter Graves and Robert Stack, Lloyd Bridges. They were all known as dramatic, serious actors. So they all came on board to this, and apparently everybody except Lloyd Bridges was in on the joke. Really, it was like Lloyd Bridges was really trying to take his character seriously for some reason. I mean, but yeah,
that's weird to me because his performance almost seems the most comedic. Like he's doing pratfalls.
Yeah, I know that.
And his facial expressions seem the most comedic out of anybody to me.
I think as it went along, especially by the time he's sniffing glue, I would hope that he's in on the joke by then. But I think like early on when he's like trying to give orders to everybody, he just, I don't know. I heard that from an interview from I think it was David Zucker, that he was a little bit slower than everybody else to just figure out what they were going for in terms of a spoof. Whereas Leslie Nielsen was 100% on board and just knew exactly how that worked. And this is something I was going to bring up also later on. There's a lack of self-awareness, or at least awareness of a joke, in Leslie Nielsen's performances here, and even in the first Naked Gun. But there's a key moment in the second Naked Gun movie where I feel like is sort of the turning point of Leslie Nielsen as, self-aware, almost a caricature, goofball character, where it's the moment where he's getting slapped by Priscilla Presley in the restaurant, and there's 3 hands all of a sudden. So he obviously gets slapped in the face, but he looks goofy-eyed and looks down like, where did that 3rd hand come from? And to me, like, that almost is like a turning point to where it's Leslie Nielsen constantly mugging at the camera, very aware of the joke, as opposed to everything before that. Really, he pretty much played it straight, especially here in Airplane. So
that's a good specific reference of how you would play that scene differently if you were playing it straight. And I think that's true. Like, by the time you get to Naked Gun 33 1/3 and Wrongfully Accused, he is completely in on the goof. He's not playing it like a detective.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll get there with Naked Gun, but I think he is amazing in this and Naked Gun. Like, legitimately hilarious.
How soon can you land?
I can't tell.
You can tell me I'm a doctor.
No, I mean, I'm just not sure.
Or can't you take a guess?
Well, not for another 2 hours.
You can't take a guess for another 2 hours?
I don't know. Airplane, there's like even more stuff pushing current boundaries today, like, or faux pas, I think. I mean, there's the jive translation scene, which I think some people might be offended by.
Yep.
Just hang loose, blood. She gonna catch up on the rebound on the med side.
What it is, Big Mama? My mama raised no dummies. I duck a rap.
Cut me some slack, Jack.
There's the one where they shake the woman and slap her, and they're just lining up to get at her.
Yeah.
And Sean, he cannot like that one bit.
I was deeply offended.
I also heard regarding that scene that it was supposed to end with Leslie Nielsen slapping her twice. Well, actually, that was an improvised moment. He was only supposed to slap her once, but it was his idea to slap her twice. And then Leslie Nielsen went to the Zaz team and said, "Wouldn't it be funny if you told the prop guy to get a whole bunch of different props and just had a line of people waiting to slap her or do other terrible things to her?" So it was originally a gag that ended with him, but then he came up with an extra idea right on the spot. So that's an example of the rare moment that they would improvise. They mostly stuck to script. It's not like it's not like Judd Apatow or Adam McKay world here at all. They really like to stick to script, and because they felt the joke was on the page and it was going to work with these type of actors delivering straight, which obviously.
Yeah, I read some stuff, like some negative stuff that people had written. I guess there were probably more recent pieces about this. But like about Abram Zucker, and there's this idea that as you mentioned, that they're not casting funny people, they're casting actors that are dramatic actors, and they want them to play it straight. And it's almost like an ego thing with them, that they want themselves to be responsible for making it funny, not the actors. But I don't know if I totally buy that. I mean, I feel like a lot of the dramatic actors that they cast, like, you can see that they're enjoying it, that it's like they don't get a chance to do this kind of thing very often, and they're loving it, And I think that's why you get some great performances out of these people. Like, I mean, Omar Sharif in Top Secret is a great example of this, like, where I think some people feel like they're taking advantage of a great actor because, they're putting him through the ringer, but, like, I feel like he is game for it, and the movie's better for it. So,
well, going hand in hand with the playing it straight with the actors, another big aspect for that for me is the score. Like, the Elmer Bernstein score is the type of score you would expect in this type of movie, and it again adds to the whole playing it straight element and not pointing out that everything is a joke. These jokes are happening within the context of this type of movie, and it works perfectly.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. And I was thinking back to, like, just where my sense of humor derives from, and I definitely think it came from the early version of the Muppets, Weird Al, Steve Martin, Bill Murray. But, here, I find pretty much everything across the board funny in the Abrams Zucker canon, especially the first two films here. I don't know, maybe it's in my blood to appreciate absurdist humor and puns and kind of like over-the-top comedy. I knew, it's funny, because when I was watching the superhero movie, I knew right away I wasn't going to like it because the humor was very mean-spirited. And it was like, people just running into things or school buses and then, almost being ridiculed. And I don't get that impression, even if some of the, humor here, like, is questionable and creepy and certainly would not fly today, it doesn't feel mean-spirited. It feels silly, certainly, but it doesn't feel like it's coming from a place where, these aren't bullies making these kinds of jokes.
Yeah, and then the one that I think in the stuff I read online seems to get called out the most nowadays is the character of Johnny.
Yes.
And like
flamboyant,
saying that the joke is that he's gay, and I really don't feel like it is at all. I feel like that's kind of he's saying such non sequitur type things and one-offs, like that's kind of the joke, and that flamboyant character is more of a like polar opposite to the way that the actors are playing it straight in the other scenes that like lets you into his humor immediately and what type of stuff he's bringing to the table. Like he's almost playing in a different genre on his own with that character, and it's just completely absurd things. And I think you need that like contrasting personality to everyone else for that humor to work.
Yeah, that character, I totally forgot about that character, and I was like, I wouldn't say I was dying of laughter, but I was enjoying some of the ridiculous stuff with him. So I could see how people might interpret it one way, but I feel like it's in enough of a gray area that it's not. I don't know. Didn't offend me deeply.
And I think it's the viewer that's projecting that stuff, because there's no jokes in the context of him being gay in the movie. I don't think that I can remember. It's more like as a kid, I don't think I had any idea that that's what was going on with that character at all. So like now I might project that idea, but I still don't think it's necessary for the actual content of his jokes. Like there's no joke about that fact that I can remember.
No, I didn't think so either. And like I mentioned, in a lot of the more recent parody films, there's like a barrage of politically incorrect gay jokes or jokes that make fun of those who are overweight. And I kind of see, like, even just the way Johnny in Airplane says, Leon is getting larger, and the delivery of that is more silly and wacky rather than like, oh, let's make fun of somebody, like I mentioned with like a bully would do in high school or something. I just don't get that impression from this early on, this representation of comedy. Certainly there are, things like just what is the deal with the pilot and that kid that is kind of uncomfortably weird, that I don't understand why he's asking him why would he think that this kid would ever be in Turkish prison? I don't know, but I still find it hilarious. But I think that's just the fun of Airplane too, is that, the absurdism of something like that, or the horse being in bed with the woman. And she tells the horse, there's juice in the fridge and you can let yourself out the back. I don't know about, man. Like, at first...
Well, there's jokes like that where I assume I'm missing something. Like,
I know.
It's just so weird. Like, this has to be a reference that I'm not understanding. Or
there's stuff where I feel like as a kid I didn't get it, and then now it's dated. The reference is dated, and I still don't get it. So
yeah, or the opposite, which we'll get to a top secret. But there's jokes when I was a kid that I just thought were funny for being weird. And like now I get that was an actual reference. So I got two versions of that joke. One not getting the reference and one getting the reference. And a classic example of that for me is in UHF, not in this realm, but when he makes the mountain out of the mashed potatoes and says, Terry, this means something. This is important. I had not seen Close Encounters, and I just thought it was hilarious that he was making saying a statue made out of mashed potatoes was important, and I still find it funny. But now, having seen Close Encounters several times, it's funny on a different level. I think it's funnier for me personally not knowing that it's a reference. Like if he had just been making a statue of mashed potatoes, it's almost funnier to me.
I think that's also like if you want to talk about the difference between the Abrams Zucker stuff and then I guess the is it the Friedberg Salzberg Seltzer their films, like, and people have said this, but it's the newer ones, they're just references. There's not really a joke there, and if you haven't seen the source material, there's no laugh. But with the Abrams Zucker thing, a lot of these movies, there's references to things, and especially as a kid, you definitely did not know what they were referencing, and it was still funny. It still worked for whatever reason, and they're very good at that, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it's really obnoxious what those guys are doing. I mean, even when I saw trailers for their films, I said, there's just no way you can ever get me to watch that movie. Their movies, I mean, even just for a little bit on YouTube, I tried to watch some clips and I couldn't get through them. Like, they are the opposite of funny. They're like anti-humor to me. I don't even know how to describe it's just like it's painful to me to see those guys attempt comedy, because it really is, let's just throw in this pop culture reference like, leave Britney alone, bring back that person who went viral, or the chocolate rain guy, bring back him who went viral.
Yeah, and I mean, all that stuff, like even 2 years later, I'm sure is not funny anymore, even if you thought it was funny the first time. But that comes back to the point about like the Abrams Zucker films. There is kind of a story, things make sense, and you're along for that ride. And most of the modern spoof movies and even a lot of modern comedies, they just throw story completely out the window because we just want to make people laugh as much as possible. And, sometimes I'm okay with that. Like, I like that idea of, let's just throw out all the cliches, all the bullshit, let's just be funny. But sometimes you need to care about the characters. You need to actually be pulled through this thing by something, and that seems to be missing.
Yeah,
now.
I genuinely think that Ted Stryker has an arc, that you grow to care about over the course of the film. I mean, he's not like, one of the most original creations in film history or comedy, but it's, there's certain, I mean, even something like The Jerk, even though obviously Steve Martin is a complete jerk and socially awkward and oblivious to how people really interact, you kind of care about his character and his journey, just because of the way Steve Martin is in general. Like, you really grow to appreciate the way these actors bring nuance to what could have been just something like a character that's just serves to ridicule the whole time. You actually care, which I think is, and that, that's also something, we brought up recently when we did an episode on the films of 1986. I remember us talking briefly about find that balance between humor and I feel like the Farrelly brothers did it early on, and Judd Apatow certainly did it early on. I mean, obviously this is more about the joke, what the Zuckers were doing. So I certainly appreciate that approach. Like I said, the Mad Magazine or the National Lampoon kind of let's throw everything against the wall approach. But I actually do care about Ted Stryker in this movie. It's not like I want to watch them crash and burn, So yeah, I see where you're coming from with that.
One other small point about Airplane, we mentioned this on Film Junk this week, but I'm wondering, it could be the first example of a post-credit stinger. Because there's a scene at the end. Did you see it, or have you seen it, Jim?
Yeah, I've been aware of what they do with the credits for a while now. I don't remember if maybe it was the second Naked Gun I saw in the theater and just sat through the credits because I knew that was coming.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know if this could very well be the first example of that. And I also know that they got into a little bit of trouble with the FBI.
What?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess, I don't know if it was the studio and the FBI, but they were not happy with the fact that they brought up the whole piracy thing at the very end of the credits, because there's obviously the copyright, blah, 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 don't use this movie or replicate it or reproduce it in any way. And they end it with, so there. And the FBI was actually mad that they took piracy so lightly that they actually contacted them to express their disgust or whatever, which is silly.
Wow.
Yeah.
I feel like that stuff has been played with by other movies since then, but yeah, that is weird that anybody would care.
Yeah. I would say that 21 Jump Street and 22 Jump Street are good examples of find that nice balance, even though I don't know if I'd necessarily call them straight parody films, but I certainly appreciate that level of humor, again, caring about the characters. Let's move on, guys, because
for sure.
That in 1985, well, I mean, and, to my mind, Police Squad is essentially 3 hours of hilarity that are pretty close to rivaling the Naked Gun films. I mean, but it lasted just 6 episodes before they had the plug pulled. So it wasn't, it was only until after that film, or that show just sort of flopped and didn't become a success that they decided, well, we better work on something. And so they kind of haphazardly put together what would eventually become Top Secret, which spoofed World War II films, as well as Elvis Presley pictures. And what we have here is kind of a crazy, absurdist joke machine. And, there isn't necessarily an arc involved or a plot that's, easily digestible or, a consistent narrative of sorts. It's really just broadly drawn characters, a lot of weird episodic skits of, some kind. It's the very definition of bizarre throughout a lot of this movie that I just adore. This is still, to this day, my favorite Abrams Zucker creation because it is so weird. And to some degree, it is a little hit and miss. There's not every joke hits, but I find that fascinating. It's like a bizarre kind of fever dream, this movie. So I love it. I know other people do think it's inconsistent, but I watch every time I rewatch it, I enjoy it more and more.
Well, I'm a huge fan of Top Secret as well. I certainly saw it after The Naked Gun. I remember the cover of this thing in video stores because the poster and the VHS cover was just, the cow suit. And I remember always seeing it and just being like, what the fuck is this? And obviously it said from the makers of Airplane or whatever, and I was intrigued, but that cow suit I think kept a lot of people away. But it was just one of those things one night with a bunch of friends at a video store, and it's like, we got to give this a chance. Let's check it out. And it was just we all were dying of laughter. And you definitely need a specific sense of humor. You need to like the Naked Guns and the Airplane movies. But I think, if you kind of warm up to that and then you see this, to me, this is the height of their mastery of that style of humor. And I think what I like the most about it is just the absurdity and just the sheer number of jokes that are being thrown around. I think there is... I will say I think there is a coherent plot in there, but it's it is mashing up all these genres, and it definitely will go for the joke over any sort of logic, and but I like that about it. And I think Val Kilmer, is it like his first major
I think it's
role? And I think he's very good in the film, and it's just funny, because he kind of became an actor that took himself pretty seriously later in his career, and I think he, as well as the Zucker team, don't really, look at this movie as anything special, especially because it kind of bombed when it came out, but I think it is something special, and just ever since I've been trying to push it on people, but not a lot of people are taking it, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's kind of how I felt when I was showing everybody Wet Hot American Summer, and they would look at me like I had lobsters crawling out of my ears when I'd be laughing so hard watching it with them. And they're just like, what? What are you laughing at? I'm just like, everything's funny. So Frank, how do you feel about Top Secret?
Well, it's interesting because I had never seen Top Secret before this. And it's weird because I do remember the cover very well in the video store as a child. Mm-hmm. And it's got an animal on it, which I figured would be enough for me to get, like...
It should have spoken to you, Frank.
It really should have. It looks so... I don't know why I never rented it. And I was actually... By the end, I was definitely on board, and I think I like it more than the 3.5 I gave it on Letterboxd, the more I think about it. And for me personally, I just find that the second half is way funnier than the first half. I don't know if that's common opinion, but I feel like this movie really hits its stride towards the end, which is rare for a comedy. And unless I'm missing jokes, which could definitely be the case at the beginning, especially considering I am not the most well-versed person when it comes to World War II movies, that there might be references and gags that I'm just missing at the beginning. But by the time it gets into the second half, I mean, the whole reverse shot scene I think is amazing. The visual gags with the magnifying glass eyeball gag and the perspective of the telephone, among other things. Like, I think all that. Oh, I have the underwater bar fight. All that stuff happens in the second half of the movie, and I think that's really like legitimately clever stuff. And not as so much laugh out loud funny as some of the stuff in Naked Gun, but just really creative. And I'm surprised that they would be not that crazy about it, because I think there are a ton of creative ideas in the movie, like not just funny. I think there's brilliance in it as well. And I would just say the musical stuff, the musical numbers, I don't find that funny. Like I feel like the joke is almost in the title of the songs, and they might play on a little too long. That's a personal thing. I don't know how other people feel about that, but overall, I really liked it. And I don't know, I was surprised that, because a lot of the times watching older comedies that you didn't see when you were a kid, it's tough to get yourself back there. But I didn't have that problem with this movie. I liked it.
I'm sorry, I really don't know any German.
That's all right. I know a little German. He's sitting over there.
Thank you.
Hillary.
Hillary. That's an unusual name.
It's a German name. It means she whose bosoms defy gravity.
The scene should be funny enough on its own, and I think that's the power of this film and Airplane and Naked Gun to some degree. But I just think, and you mentioned the musical numbers too. Like, I don't think they're hysterically funny. It's rewatching also the second Naked Gun. There's a dance number in that I think is pretty equal to the dance number he has with the woman that he's helping out in Top Secret. Like, they're very similar. Like, they sort of occasionally, especially if you watch all the Naked Gun movies, and then if you watch certain episodes of Police Squad, they did recycle some of their best gags to some degree, which I don't have a problem with necessarily either. But yeah, like you mentioned, I think there's just really creative, inventive things throughout this movie that nobody else really tried to replicate in any capacity. I mean, again, it's sort of the throw it against the wall approach to see what works. And it's disappointing to know that they're pretty hard on themselves because this wasn't a success when they kind of hoped it would be. But then at the same time, it's not a straight parody of one style or one genre or one type of, it's not a parody of a disaster film consistently throughout the whole movie. So I don't know if people were ready for a comedy like this at the time. I think it's one of those examples of being ahead of its time.
Well, I think it was definitely tough to market, and I mean, the poster is kind of an example of that. It's like, I don't know, it doesn't really tell you anything about what you're getting into. But I will say it's also a movie that I think rewatches, you're rewarded. There's a lot of weird things in the background that you notice on rewatches, like I don't know if you guys know the scene where they're meeting and there's like a statue of a pigeon in the background. You know what I'm talking about? There's like all these weird things happening in the background, and like you might notice one or two of them the first time you watch it, but then if you focus on it, there's like crazy stuff happening, and like the idea of like there's humans that are sitting on the statue and then they fly away and then the statue poops, and like it's crazy. So I love all those little things. I mean, I agree with what you're saying, Frank. Like the musical stuff is probably the weakest, but it's still impressive that they pulled off some of this stuff. And I think the first half there are things like I like the scene when they're on the train coming in, all the weird gags like out the window, and like he's listening to like learn how to speak German, and all the words are like stereotypical German words and that kind of thing. And then like that's kind of reflected later as well when they meet the French resistance, and all their names are like French words like croissant and chocolat mousse and stuff like that. But I agree, like it's not stuff that I necessarily laugh out loud, especially on rewatches, but I just appreciate it and I don't get tired of it. So
yeah, it finds the right balance between, the prop joke, the quotable dialogue, the physical comedy, and just weird random stuff. And again, like I certainly didn't, when I was younger, I did not understand the antenna going up when Omar Sharif is rushed into a car cube.
I love the him returning as the car cube as well. I think all that stuff is really funny. Did not see it coming, and it's an original sight gag that I don't think I've seen in anything else, like you had mentioned.
Yeah, that's the joy of watching this movie, is that there's just things in here that were fresh then, and then rewatching it now is still fresh to me. So yeah, I love it.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think that if you haven't gone back to check this out, because it is sort of underappreciated, I think people should really seek this out. I mean, I don't know if it's gotten a proper release. I should have looked up and checked that out.
It has a proper DVD release. I don't think there's a Blu-ray, at least not North American. There might be in another region.
Yeah.
So no, it doesn't have a proper release.
No Baby Blue. That's sad.
Well, I just want to get the Nothing But Trouble reference. In this,
right.
Like, it's weird when, like, in Nothing But Trouble, one of my favorite scenes, well, the greatest scene is the dinner scene, and they serve Hawaiian punch, and they use a motor oil thing to serve. And I always thought that was Nothing But Trouble's joke, but it isn't. It's in.
That's right.
Now, the joke isn't that they're drinking Hawaiian punch in this one for dinner and pouring it with an oil can spout. It's that they're giving fluids to Omar Sharif in the car, and it's like a reverse of the use of the oil can and the spout. But I gotta say, it did bring Nothing But Trouble down a little bit for me, and it just sucks because the more we get into stuff on Film Junk and the more stuff I see, the more I realize how little originality there is, and like how many things that I just have to question. How many things that I think are funny are actually original, maybe they're slight variations or references, and I just haven't seen the thing they're referencing, and that kind of depresses me a bit.
Maybe you should not watch any Marx Brothers movies, because then you might be even more depressed.
Yeah, I don't think I should watch any more movies ever. Just rewatches from now on.
Yeah, stop going to the cinema, guys. Just concentrate on older movies. It's a lot more fun. Oh, my Lord. But I do like the fact that your premiums are sort of, you've had like John Carpenter specials, and you're talking about Tim Burton coming up. I'm like, I see what's going on here, guys. That's very, very good. Very clever. I think it's important to get your stamp on a Directors Club-centric episode.
Yeah, I mean, that's where we really delve into the old stuff. But I'm doing this show now. I'm thinking, like, we have always kind of neglected comedy because we've thought, there's not really, like, what do you talk about other than this part was funny, this part was funny. But now I'm, like, thinking, man, we should be considering some comedy stuff.
Yeah, I could see that working out pretty well. Do an Adam Sandler special premium.
Oh, yeah.
I think the Tim Burton one would almost be a comedy one.
Yeah, well, well, speaking of which, you know who says it's Enrico Palazzo, right, Frank?
What? In
Naked Gun, the spectator towards the end who screams out, "It's Enrico Palazzo!"
It's Enrico Palazzo!
I'm trying to remember who it was. I don't remember.
It's Enrico Palazzo!
It's Francis.
Oh, right, yes.
From Pee-wee's Big Adventure.
Or Chubbs from Teen Wolf.
Oh, yeah, I should have gone there, too.
So if there's an even bigger thing going on here with Tim Burton in The Naked Gun that I don't know if we all picked up on. I have a feeling Sean did, but I think we'll wait till we get a bit more into the movie.
Well,
we just want to
instead of it being too repetitive, why don't you set this one up, Frank? Because I've set up the other two. Let's change it up here, just for kicks.
All right. So, Naked Gun, I think out of anything we watched is the one I've seen the most, loved the most as a kid. Actually, I've never seen Police Squad, but I think I'm going to buy it for sure based on this. And I just, as a kid, 1 and 2, I absolutely loved, would rent all the time, owned on VHS after that, and even 33 and a third had a soft spot I had a soft spot for that. And I think as a kid, I identified more with the absurdity of the movies and the visual gags. And now I've completely flipped, and the reason why I love it is the deadpan deliveries, the wordplay on metaphors coming out of narration and film noir stuff, and the sexual references now I think are hilarious, which I didn't get as a kid. And I just think it's going back to what we said before, the idea of the deadpan aspect. And this movie brings it all together for me and has that perfect narrator. Having a narrator that's deadpan, first of all, adds a whole nother element to the comedy. And having that person be Leslie Nielsen, that's the character you're following through the movies, is almost perfect for me in spoofing like noir stuff as well and detective stories. To me, it's just like everything coming together for them. And I admit the trilogy kind of goes down and peaks with the first one, but I still find the first one really, really good. And I mean, my favorite scene by far out of all the stuff we watched for this episode, it's when Nordberg has initially been put into the coma, and it's George Kennedy and Leslie Nielsen trying to console Mrs. Nordberg. And that progression of like Frank Drebin just saying the worst things, which also had take on a new meaning after the O.J. Simpson trial when he says,
of course,
could have been a jealous husband or a gay lover. But the end line where George Kennedy says, and we just want you to know, as soon as Nordberg's back up on his feet, he's welcome again at Police Squad. And Leslie Nielsen says something to the effect, unless, of course, he's a drooling vegetable. But I think that goes without saying. Like, honestly, I was absolutely dying, like watching that line. And I think I talked about it at work for the next 2 days because my coworker Paul also loves these movies a lot.
There's no way for a man to die.
Yeah, you're right, Ed. A parachute not opening, that's the way to die. Getting caught in the gears of a combine. Having your nuts bit off by a Laplander, that's the way I want to go.
Oh, Frank. Oh, this is terrible.
Don't you worry, Wilma. Your husband is going to be all right. Don't you worry about anything.
He's right, Wilma. But I wouldn't wait until the last minute to fill out those organ donor cards.
Yeah, it's, do you guys get a perverse thrill out of watching O.J. Simpson, like, get the crap beat out of him now? Like, even in the second one, where he's being dragged under different cars, and then ultimately the bus. I don't know why. It's a weird feeling watching O.J. Simpson getting the crap beat out of him.
Yeah, and there's so many things that, like, take on a new meaning. It's like they almost knew how his life was going to play out, because there's a weird subtext to every joke where I'm like, man, it's weird that they did that thing specifically, or like said it could be a jealous husband as I don't know. It's that whole thing is weird. I never found the Nordberg stuff all that funny anyway. It was never like, it's the most over the top stuff, which tends to be my least favorite stuff in these movies. But I mean, it's still okay. I don't roll my eyes at it or anything like that, but yeah, it's certainly interesting seeing where that human being ended up and how these movies fit into that legacy.
Yeah, I think it was in either 88 or 89 that we rented this. And it was, oh my God, it was one of those huge rentals that was always out at the video store that, like, my family, we just kept calling or kept going back, hoping it was in. And when we finally watched it, we were beside ourselves with laughter. And, you know, it's funny because, like, I watched the Police Squad series after this because I think I also rented, like, all 3 cassettes that had, like, 2 episodes each on them from Blockbuster. And I actually found those episodes to be even funnier. They were weirder. They're more in line with the Top Secret kind of absurdity throughout, where they're strange throwaway jokes.
Oh, yeah. I did rent it as a kid. Too. Now that I think about it, after watching Naked Gun, I think the fact that you're saying it's stranger makes sense, because I remember not getting a lot of the jokes in that show. Like the Naked Gun plays a bit more to kids, I think, than the show would.
And it's possible that if you watch these episodes again, you might get disappointed because there's a lot of recycled jokes. Like, I think, you know, they have the joke, is this some kind of bust? And then it's reused again in the second one. But that doesn't bother me. I still think, especially the first Naked Gun, is fairly close to being as good as Top Secret and Airplane. I think I just like weirder stuff a little bit more, to where I just prefer their earlier work. But at the same time, the first Naked Gun, I mean, the whole sequence at the baseball game is consistently great. I love the blurs. I was like we were so taken aback by the final guy getting his head knocked off when we first saw this. That was just like, oh my God. But it's still, my dad and I, that was our sense of humor, is just everything that takes place at the baseball game, and pretty much the majority of UHF. So how about you, Sean?
Well, so I was just going to say, I mean, out of the ones we rewatched, I think I laughed the most at this one currently. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's pretty close. It's up there for me. I think I definitely watched it a bit more as a kid, and I have that attachment to it. Frank, you got to agree. I'm assuming the baseball stuff with Major League, there had to be a connection there for you, because I feel like with me and my friends, there was like that. The fact that there's a section at the baseball game made this something we wanted to return to.
Well, even just at this age, I think baseball was the only sport I really even thought about and was into. So I loved everything with baseball pretty much. And the baseball scene is definitely one of my favorites. And the performance as the umpire is pretty amazing, I would say. That's still funny for me.
Yeah, and I mean, it's interesting that I think different kinds of humor stood out in each of these three movies to me. Like if Airplane was more the wordplay, Top Secret was more the absurd stuff. This one, there's a lot of physical comedy. There's a lot of, I mean, there is still wordplay, but it just Leslie Nielsen's performance I definitely appreciated, and I feel like he's bringing something more than just reading the lines he's told, as we said that they kind of have a reputation for doing. And but it is interesting that you pointed out, Jim, that there's a turning point where he starts mugging to the camera a lot more at some point in the series.
Yeah, that's the term.
And but that's not really happening in the first one, which is I think part of what makes it great. And but yeah, and as you mentioned, Frank, a lot of the sexual jokes definitely went over my head when I was younger. And
nice beaver.
Yeah. Well,
classic.
Well, and then like Loaded Weapon pretty much copied that exact joke with the gratuitous beaver shot and the Basic Instinct. Like that's the thing. They got to the jokes first.
Oh my God, Loaded Weapon. I forgot about that one.
And I think that's why the spoof genre died off, because even watching these now and forgetting what some of the jokes were, I mean, there's a suspense to like, now that you know how these movies work, someone will say a line and your brain is working like, okay, what's the out-of-the-box take on that? Like, where are they going to go with this? And you almost try to figure out the jokes. And they, honestly, these movies still surprised me, where they took a joke even further than I expected, or didn't take the obvious route with stuff. They took maybe a more submersive take on it, or it went to a different spot that wouldn't be what you'd expect. They almost expect people to be listening or watching this and like listening to the lines and being, oh, I know what they're going to do here. And they still try to surprise people with their writing.
Yeah. Also, going back to Airplane, it's interesting. Like the pacing of Airplane and the pacing of the jokes is definitely a little slower. And when you've kind of become accustomed to Naked Gun, Top Secret, and then you rewatch Airplane, you're kind of waiting. You're like, okay, there's going to be a joke here and a joke here, and then it kind of doesn't come, and you're like, oh, that's weird. And it's just because they hadn't quite got to that level yet. But, like, I remember there's a joke in Airplane where, I mean, I think it's a joke. It's not really that funny, but, like, where they're kind of, Stryker's, like, looking at the control panel for the plane, and it's kind of panning across, and it just keeps going.
Yeah.
And I guess the joke is just that it's this huge control panel, but like I feel like in a later film they would have like had all kinds of other weird shit like starting to pop up on the screen, and I was waiting for it and it just didn't happen.
Well, and Spaceballs pretty much borrows the same gag with the introduction of Dark Helmet's ship. Like it just goes on and on forever. Which is kind of reappropriating that joke. Some other sequences that stand out to me is like the I'm into something good music video tagline.
Oh yeah, that's so good at montages.
Yeah, and who's the other one? Shit, I lost it for a second. Anyway, sorry.
The Platoon, when they walk out of Platoon.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know why I didn't remember, but when he's coming off the airplane after the beginning, and it's weird. The celebrity everyone is waiting for is Weird Al, just slayed me for some reason. And
as I've sent a link to you guys, I think that Weird Al is on record. Top Secret's his favorite film of all time, and he's championed it. I don't know if at that point he had put that out there, but it is a weird coincidence that he's in it.
He's in all three of them, isn't he? All the three Naked Gun movies. I know he's in the third one because he's at the Oscars with Vanna White.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he's in the second one. I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't remember seeing him in the second one, but I just assumed that he would be. But yeah, I mean, like we mentioned earlier with like the mugging to the camera, I feel like the awareness of a joke is really like I just think guys like Jimmy Fallon, I mean, and Mike Myers, Adam Sandler. I mean, I realize Saturday Night Live is a whole other platform where they would sort of smirk at the camera or break at each other's jokes. And to me, that got old after a while. I think there are instances of that happening, even in a movie that are actually very charming. I think even in Top Secret, they mention like, oh, this sounds like something out of a bad movie. And they look to the camera, like that kind of stuff I think is overdone in a lot of contemporary movies where it's just like, let's wink at the camera to make sure the audience knows we're in on the joke. And I just think like guys like Adam Sandler certainly smirk a lot at, their own stuff. And I just think that what Leslie Nielsen does here is really just like walking that fine line. Because, even do great physical comedy here, but he still plays it like he's a hard-boiled detective. Like even some of the things he says, you mentioned Frank with the overdubbing narrator, like her hair was the color of gold in old paintings. It sounds like something that you'd hear right of crime fiction. So I think that sort of works in its favor.
The kind of legs you could suck on for a day. And my favorite one of all of those is Naked Gun 2.5 when he's...
Yep, that was one of the first things you sent us, and I love that.
It's like, and breasts that say, hey, look at these. That stuff is amazing to me.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, everything in Police Squad, especially when I think about it, and I didn't even realize that Joe Dante actually directed one of the episodes until I rewatched it, which was interesting just to see, like, him starting out in that world, because he was, Joe Dante's another interesting director that we covered, but he started out with something called The Movie Orgy, which is like this 7-hour crazy mashup of stuff that, like you probably find on YouTube, but a lot of it was taken out of context and just like these weird non sequiturs or just strange, surreal educational videos. Like he would string all this stuff together seamlessly that would definitely fit into the world of Kentucky Fried Movie and Amazon Women on the Moon. Obviously, Amazon Women on the Moon he had a part in, but I just think it's interesting too, like just some of the names that they worked on with Police Squad is interesting, and how it sort of evolved into the Naked Gun series. But then I think the Zucker team left. They all sort of broke up, I guess you could say, and did all their own projects after the Naked Gun.
Well,
yeah, it makes me wonder if the three of them together is the key. It makes me wonder if there's other people involved in these that were also kind of unsung heroes. I
would imagine Pat Proft is possibly one of those, because that name came up in the second Naked Gun, which
is just David Zucker and Pat Proft writing.
Well, I know Pat Proft did Wrongfully Accused, but that's an interesting point.
I think it is. I think they probably have different angles on things, and when we talk about how the three movies specifically that we talked about, they seem to approach all the different types of humor and play in different directions. And I think probably within that team, certain members are better at different types of humor, and I think there is something special about the three of them together that kind of you get the full pastiche of humor when all three are involved.
Yeah, because I think Naked Gun 33 and a third is definitely the weakest of the three, and I think
Peter Siegel directed that.
Yeah, that's again like they find these outliers that that would sort of contribute. I know that was his first film, but he went on to do like Tommy Boy, if I'm not mistaken, and other things. So, but yeah, no, it's just interesting to think about, like just their dynamic together and how they must have worked together. And it's like any great team. I guess they would want to go off and do their own sort of solo side projects. Like Jerry Zucker would go on to do probably the biggest success of his career with Ghost, because that was a huge hit.
That's kind of crazy that he did that movie. But I was thinking about that because, are there any other well-known 3-man directing teams? I feel like even 2-man directing teams, there's more of those, and I feel like a lot of those do end up breaking off and going their own ways, probably because you can make more money as a single director as opposed to a dual or triple director team.
Yeah, I don't know of any other examples of a triple. Do you, Frank?
No, I couldn't really think of any.
That's interesting too.
I mean, certainly there's anthology films that have more than 2 directors, but something like what they do, I don't know.
Yeah. There should be more triplets out there. You got a lot of you got the Coen brothers and Farrelly brothers, a lot of brother teams. There should be some triplets. That's what we need more of.
Googling 3-man directing teams, I just get a lot of 3-man wrestling teams, so I don't think there's any out there.
There's 3 men and a baby.
I mentioned something earlier when we were talking about Tim Burton coming into here, and I thought you guys might have picked up on it. And this is for the listeners too. If anyone can shed any light on this, I couldn't find anything online. So there's a scene in a meatpacking factory in Naked Gun towards the end where he's firing a gun and the guy ends up dying and falling into a vat of chemicals. And the shot at the end is his hand going down into the chemicals, just like the Joker in Tim Burton's Batman. Now, and even on IMDb, it says it's a reference to Batman.
Was the trailer out?
This has to be wrong because I don't know, but Batman came out the year after Naked Gun. So I don't know if they're both referencing an older movie that I haven't seen. I couldn't find it online. That what they could both be drawing from. What I like to think is Tim Burton had like the brilliant idea to spoof Naked Gun, and people 20 years in the future would think, oh, he added a joke to Naked Gun retroactively as a reference. I'm pretty sure that's what the Tim Burton did. He is a genius. He added a reference. He added a reference that wasn't there in the Naked Gun. Absolute brilliance.
I hadn't considered that at all.
I feel like the trailer must have been out or something, and they're just trying to play into
Oh, come on, Sean. No way.
Just throwing it out there.
I also entertained the thought, but I couldn't find it online, that maybe that scene was added for the video release or something like that. It wasn't in the theatrical. But if anyone knows or has any light to shed on that, I would love to hear how that went down.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I was just thinking maybe they saw a rough cut of Batman beforehand.
So I think I just found one example of a 3-man writer-director team, 3-person, I believe. The movie Turbo Kid was directed by 3 people. And I think there's
really?
a handful of these sort of filmmaker collectives out there.
Yeah.
Although usually still you find one person gets the directing credit, probably for DGA reasons or something weird like that. But yeah, there might be a few examples out there. I just don't know.
Well, feel free to share those at directorsclubpodcast@gmail.com along with Frank's Tim Burton inquiry. That would be get some of the listeners involved in this, yeah. But we definitely covered like what makes a parody movie successful, and I think that's the fact that like none of these movies that they've done come across as shrill or obnoxious either, because like I think a lot of comedy now is loudness and mean-spiritedness, and it comes across as very callous at times, rather, like something like Horrible Bosses, even in the title, which, I don't dislike necessarily. Like there's a place for the, I guess It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia kind of humor, but I don't necessarily get invested in that. Like, I don't feel the need to check in on those characters as much. It's like, I don't know if, how do you feel, Frank, about that kind of humor? I don't know if you...
Well, I think you're onto something, and I was thinking back to your earlier point about taking what the Farrelly brothers can do, taking raunchy things or maybe mean-spirited, I don't know, but adding heart to them as well. And I think that is a thing, and I was thinking specifically of Horrible Bosses, And the root of that, to me, is somewhat Fairly and also Bad Santa, which is like all the Bad Mom movies, Bad Teacher, all that stuff kind of stems from that. And interestingly enough, like even Bad Santa, I think there's heart in Bad Santa between him and the kid as well, even though he like treats him like shit for the most part. There is more of an emotional connection I have with that movie than any of the other terrible comedies. So, I think you're right on the money with the anger and shock value direction humor's gone. And Knocked Up, I would say too, is a movie that is raunchy but still has a lot of heart and likable characters. So yeah, I hated Horrible Bosses and a lot of those other movies. So I don't know.
I would think the Hangover is the other sort of looming influence that is still every other comedy, R-rated comedy that's coming out is still kind of carrying on that wave of party influenced raunchy comedies. And I like the Hangover, the sequels not so much. But, there is a little bit of mean-spiritedness in that film, I would say. And, yeah, just this idea of we just want to see people get fucked up and do crazy shit, and that's all it is.
That's all Bad Mom was, really. Bad Moms, that is. Right. Where I think even Jay mentioned, like, I could not take another montage of them dancing and, drinking excessively, dancing in slow motion while a hip hop song plays. Like, I was just like, really? Is this where comedies are now, where it's just like a series of, goody two-shoe people acting outrageous, and we get to watch it and watch really bad things. And then what's really strange too is that they try to add sentimentality late in the game to sort of compensate for all that mean-spiritedness. Like, oh, but actually we really do love our kids. Like there's a scene where they're like at a restaurant and they're actually making fun of their kids. And then suddenly they turn around and go, but we love them. It's like being in a bumper car when it comes to comedy. It's like not finding that right balance, that right tone that I think like the Farrelly brothers did. Especially, I know, Frank, you're a big fan of Kingpin. That to me is like a movie that completely works as a comedy that's vulgar and absurd and crazy, but has heart, I also think, between like the relationships there.
Yeah, I know. I do love Kingpin probably more than I could ever describe. And while you were mentioning Jay, I had another note here. One of the most infamous film junk moments is Jay going to the bathroom with a wireless mic and this happens in The Naked Gun, and I didn't even realize it at the time. That I don't know if Sean, if you were aware when that happened on the show that
I think people in the comments were definitely saying like, that was the Naked Gun moment.
Oh, okay. I never picked up on that before, but
was that during the Avatar review?
I think so. The one. Never picked up on the commonality between the two there.
We also would like
The joke is not in the title of any of the movies we've talked about. There is almost no joke in the title other than the exclamation point, I guess, is something you could say, right? So that reveals...
The Naked Gun is kind of a joke.
I never got that joke, Sean. Can you explain that?
Neither did I. I was going to ask you about that.
Well, it's just Naked Gun. It's like a penis. Like, I don't know. It just seems like a pretty clear reference to me.
Okay, all right.
But, we should mention, Frank, you were saying via email, should these films be referred to as the exclamation point trilogy? And I was actually curious where they got the exclamation point from, because it carried through into shit like Mafia. But
I think it's zero.
I think it actually...
Zero.
Yeah, it comes from 0 Hour. So,
but it is interesting that
weird.
these three, where they like it was the core team. Like I think that is an exclamation point trilogy. I think if we can go as far to say that there's a Cornetto trilogy, which I've resisted, this has to be the exclamation point trilogy, and I could not refer to it as that. See it referred to as that anywhere online.
The only problem I have with that, Frank, is that The Naked Gun is part of its own trilogy.
That's true.
I know, it's gross. Don't. But the 2.5 and 33 1/3 do not have exclamation points in their titles. So they're almost, there's a Venn diagram there of trilogies that the Naked Gun is the overlap portion for.
Right.
Well, now we can sort of just do like a roundtable approach to other parody films that we might have watched in the last week or two in preparation for this, or anything that you just kind of want to bring up that you feel adds to this conversation in general. So we can start with Sean this time.
Well, I already mentioned Kentucky Fried Movie. The only other thing I had time to watch was Ruthless People.
Oh, right, yeah.
Which you had mentioned, Jim, and it doesn't totally fit in because it's not really a spoof, but I was kind of curious what these guys could do in sort of a more straightforward comedy scenario. And it was pretty good. I think, I didn't laugh a ton, but I think the cast is pretty solid. I guess I'll just say the premise is that basically there's a guy who's thinking about, he's kind of plotting to kill his wife, and then an enemy of his that he worked with kidnaps his wife and threatens to kill her if he doesn't pay money or whatever, and he immediately sees this as the perfect opportunity for him to not have to kill her himself. And then there's all these other twists on it and sort of ulterior motives and people getting in over their head, and it's kind of a really clever concept, and I think that's what I appreciated most about it. Interesting that Zucker, Abrams, and Zucker did not write the script for this. They were just brought on as directors. But the cast is pretty solid. You've got Danny DeVito, Judge Reinhold, Helen Slater, Bill Pullman, who could be my favorite performance in the film, and Bette
It was
Midler.
his first film.
Really?
Yeah.
Didn't know that.
Yeah, that was Bill Pullman's first film, and definitely one of the highlights of this film involves him interrupting kind of a drop-off sequence where Judge Reinhold has like the clown mask on.
Mm-hmm.
What the hell is going on? I'm robbing you! Stop him! Did you shoot at me? No, you moron. There's police all over the place. Hundreds of them. Do I look that stupid? Yes, you do. If you shot at me, where's your gun? Well, you're too sharp for me. You got me figured out. I don't have one. That was a brand new tire. Give me your keys. I don't believe this.
Give the bag to Bozo, drop the gun, and put your hands in the air.
Who said that?
This could very well be the stupidest person on the face of the earth.
This movie is a total farce, essentially. And it's interesting, like you mentioned, just to see how they would do with a more streamlined, straightforward comedy. And I certainly remember liking this movie quite a bit, even when it first came out on video. I remember laughing fairly consistently. I think I just enjoy anytime Danny DeVito is a complete slimeball. I think that's hilarious. I think he's just a brilliant comedic actor going all the way back to Taxi. So that's definitely a highlight. And I don't think it's nearly on the same level as their parody films, but it's certainly enjoyable. And even Jim Abrams himself would go on to work with Bette Midler again in a movie that I saw for the first time called Big Business. Do you guys remember this movie at all?
Never the poster, never saw it.
Yeah, it's It's not bad. Again, it's more in the middle for me. I'm kind of just... It's essentially one long joke where the setup is essentially two sets of twins are separated at birth, and one is from kind of a small town, almost like the town in Funny Farm, even more exaggerated, more or less, and the other is they all live in the big city in New York, and they just they're basically the fish out of water small town people collide with the big city New York people, and the whole joke is they wind up staying, the two sets of twins wind up staying at the same hotel and almost narrowly keep bumping into each other. And the thing about this, though, I found really interesting to watch is the special effects in terms of how they got two Bette Midlers and two Lily Tomlins often to appear in the same frame or walk into an elevator, and then the other would walk out of another door. It looks seamless. Like, you don't see any green screen. You don't see anything that would indicate any sort of trickery involved. So I thought this was actually... The best thing about it was just watching it and kind of go, how'd they do that? That was really well done. Like, I couldn't find any flaws in how they managed to put these people together in the same room, or would just narrowly run into each other. But it's really, again, much like Ruthless People, farce, physical comedy, exaggerated characters. Fred Ward is really funny in this. He shows up as, someone who's trying to woo Lily Tomlin, and of course, a lot of it has to do with mistaken identity, because when they show up in the same hotel, potential suitors are coming by and get them mixed up, and they would wind up sometimes sitting in the same restaurant in complete opposite ends, and it's really goofy and ridiculous. But I think that the charm of Bette Midler and the chemistry between her and Lily Tomlin together, also playing very extreme opposites, it's pretty enjoyable for the most part. And it's interesting to see what Jim Abrams did on his own, other than I'm trying to think of what else.
Hot Shots?
Besides Mafia, I guess. Hot Shots, right, exactly. So yeah, I think Big Business is much, since you mentioned with Ruthless People, it's just a, kind of a fairly funny farce that just happens to work because of its cast.
Cool, yeah. That sounds interesting.
Yeah.
Well, I'll talk about the Pat Proft contribution here, which is wrongfully accused. Now, I don't have a ton to say about it. I don't think it's that great. As we talked about before, it's venturing into way too self-aware and easy references like a Star Wars lightsaber as that an usher uses instead of a flashlight right when Star Wars was getting big again, and it's just really lazy for the most part. But the one scene that works as a reference and spoof and is like, it was the thing I laughed the hardest at out of anything I watched this week, is there's a scene where he's on the run, much like The Fugitive. It's a spoof of The Fugitive, which was very popular around this time. And he escapes into a town which apparently is the highest policeman per capita town, which really isn't that important, but he goes into a fishing store and disguises himself as a fisherman. And what's the guy's name from America's Most Wanted? He comes out and starts questioning him, and he basically does the usual suspects, but using a wall of fishing tackle as his names for everything. So he's like, hey, I haven't seen you around these parts before. What's your name? He's like, Buzzin' Frog from Rapala.
That's hilarious.
And that whole
I remember that
section, I swear to God, I was dying. And that's to me is a great example of a spoof / reference scene in these. The rest of the movie's trash, but I mean, it was worth it for that. A couple other laughs here and there, but I was really hoping to find some gems in here, and that was the only one.
I've never seen you around here, Mr.
Buzzin' Frog. Born on the shores of the Uralaba River in Rapala. A couple of husky jerks brought me to Slimy Slug, South Dakota. You know, up there by Timberdoodle. The Zebco brothers, Smithwick and Salty Dog Shrimp. I can't go fishing this afternoon. I've got a big meeting over at Minstrom. I'd forget my genitals if they weren't superglued in between my legs. Water skiing accident.
Now that whole sequence in the fishing store is really funny, leading up to when he sees the wanted poster.
Yes, I agree, and I get it confused because I don't know. I wanted to mention that as well, but I know another movie did a similar gag, and I can't remember which one came first. I actually had it confused in my head, where it might be Loaded Weapon. I'm not sure.
You might be right.
Where they do a police rendition picture. And it's like the first joke is that it looks like a kid's picture, that like it's a Mr. Potato Head thing. And then they show later it's them arresting a person with a head like that. And it's pretty similar to the guy incognito joke in The Simpsons too. There's a bunch of like similar jokes out in the world with that take, but I mean it's a slightly different one. I thought that joke was going to be like he was going to draw circles around his eyes or something else ridiculous I had forgotten, and somehow they get into a fight, or he picks up binoculars and eventually turns himself into the altered version of his own photo by doing stuff in the store, but didn't play out like that. But I love that. That is easily the highlight of that movie.
Yeah, I would agree. It's that whole gag is very Looney Tunes kind of inspired. Like I could see Bugs Bunny doing something like that.
Yeah.
And clearly Chuck Jones is also an example of a very early satirist / parody artist who, would do those types of things in his cartoons. But yeah, I would agree with, I wish I liked Wrongfully Accused a lot more than I do. I feel like it wears out its welcome after a while. Like, I think it kind of starts off strong, and then, that whole set piece is great, and then it really peters out after a while.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the problems with some of these later movies, too, is, they just start, like, smashing together, like, any popular movie that they can, right? Like it doesn't commit to that initial.
Well, even
thing
Top
that
Secret wasn't parodying
seemed to be
anything that was actually popular at the time.
Yeah.
Nor was Police Squad, right? Like they were almost fulfilling a gap that those movies weren't being made while kind of taking the piss out of them at the same time.
Yeah, but even in something like Scary Movie 3, they just, it's supposed to be a parody of horror films and, things like Scream, or at the time when The Ring was popular and whatnot. But, they just decided to throw in, a Matrix Reloaded joke with George Carlin as the architect, just like, let's just throw that in there randomly. Why not?
And I remember, I think at the time,
right.
And this is another thing where spoof and parody is gone. It tends to exist more in the realm of sketch comedy nowadays. And I remember, I think it happened before Scary Movie. They did a actually really good spoof of The Matrix and The Architect with Will Ferrell on the MTV Movie Awards. And they would intercut, like those are actually pretty good spoof stuff as well, including, I can't remember. I think Andy Samberg worked on those. And
didn't Ben Stiller do a bunch of them?
Yeah, but I think on the later ones where Jimmy Fallon hosted and the other one, those were basically written by the guys who did Hot Rod and Popstar. And I mean, it definitely shows to me. And there's one with the third Star Wars movie where Jimmy Fallon hosted, and a gag involving barbecue on Anakin's robe, which I still think is one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life. And yeah, I think like parody's kind of lost its way, but at least it exists sometimes really, and it thrives in sketch comedy formats, which is interesting considering you said that the Kentucky Fried Movie originated from taking ideas when they were a sketch comedy group originally.
Yeah. No, that's true. I mean, going back to Saturday Night Live in general, I mean, that's that was their game. I mean, they were also politically, sending up a lot of different things. They still do, but it's funny because like I think if the Zuckers are almost like the SCTV of parody, then Friedberg and Seltzer are like the Mad TV of parody to some degree. Because I never found Mad TV to be funny at all.
Well, it is interesting too that.
But let's not forget Mad Magazine here. Like, Mad Magazine's amazing.
Oh yeah, for sure. But I remember when I was in university and I was taking like some film courses, and we were getting into like Italian neorealism and other stuff, like Italian films, and there was a parody. I don't know how I randomly stumbled upon it during the day. SCTV dedicated a whole episode to like spoofing Italian movies called Rome Italian Style. Yeah. And it's like a half an hour episode that like I know a lot of the SCTV people were like truly like film fans and studied film, and it was like that really is if you're going to spoof those types of movies, like what's the audience for that? Like that's truly a labor of love that only so few people will get, and I happened to come across it at like the most perfect time, and it was awesome.
It's almost like the documentary now.
Yeah.
Series.
Yeah, which I have to watch.
Oh, that's so good. It's really funny.
Yeah.
No, I think that's the thing too. I think SCTV really excelled in doing that type of parody that took itself. That I should say it's along the lines of the early Zuckers with Abrams. With Airplane. And they did also Days of the Week, which was a soap opera parody, but completely straight-faced. To where when I was younger, I didn't get the humor. I was like, this is taken way too seriously.
Yeah, totally. And SCTV, like they had like a weird ballsiness to where, like obviously new parodies, they only like make jokes about the most popular things.
Yeah.
Where they were almost parodying stuff that had a limited even audience to get the jokes, like Canadian films or other Canadian stuff and Italian movies. Like they like really had kind of a I wouldn't say brave, but like against the grain approach to parody and what they actually decided to parody.
Yeah, I think there's a book that I need to pick up, and I can't recall who wrote it, but I heard an interview on a podcast with the author of somebody who I believe went through every single SCTV episode to pinpoint exactly what was satirized, what was parodied, all the references that show made in its entirety, which would be a very interesting sort of just reference guide to have on. And just to know where a lot of this stuff came from, because again, a lot of things went over my head, a lot of references I didn't get at the time. That would be very interesting to go back to.
Is there a website?
I don't know.
For something like that? Like that, somebody needs to come up with that if that doesn't exist. Like it's just a reference website for like, what is a movie referencing in this scene, you know? Like that would be...
Yeah, I think actually one forgotten, I mentioned it briefly, but The Simpsons from 1990 to 1998 was one of the best sources of parody and spoof.
Absolutely. Like I even think their Cape Fear parody is better than Cape Fear.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean that whole, like to me, in terms of comedy writing on a TV series, that era, season 3 to season 8, I would say is the best of anything ever.
Yeah. In terms of comedy, absolutely. Like it was one of the it was the best written show on TV during that time.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. Now, are there other examples of recent comedies or anything else you wanted to bring up real quick here that we can sort of get ready to close out the show?
I would just mention briefly, I only watched half of it, but Basketball was something else I wanted to touch on because I think when I first met Sean at Silicon Nights, I'm like, you gotta watch Basketball, buddy. Like and he watched it and he's like, it's garbage. He's probably if it was today, he would have given it a courtesy 3 out of 5 on Letterboxd because he had just met me. But in actuality, he wanted to give it a 1.5. And
I don't know if that's true. I don't totally remember it, but I remember there being some funny things in it.
But I think it is an interesting hybrid between a Zucker script and then adding Matt Stone and Trey Parker and bringing a South Park sensibility to it. And not everything works, but I still laugh at a lot of stuff. And I think apparently David Zucker and his friends invented the game of basketball like before the movie, and they actually played it and turned it into the movie. And it has some okay commentary on sports at the time and relocation and interleague play and stuff like that. But I think it kind of gets lost in the shuffle, and I don't hear people mention it often. And I do see how people could hate it, but I personally still like it quite a bit.
Yeah, I remember liking it fine when it first came out, and I remember that's right around when South Park was starting out, if I recall.
Yeah.
And that I sort of went back and saw things like Hannibal the Musical and Orgasmo, and didn't think too much of like some of their earlier stuff. But man, you want to talk about great comedies? What they, the South Park movie and Team America. They did some incredible work. And I haven't kept up with South Park, but I hear nothing but amazing things about recent seasons as being like some of the best satire on television, period.
Yeah, I think when South Park gets it right, they are amazing at it. Like, there's some episodes that, Aspen parodying 80s movies is like a perfect episode to me too. So, and that's like where the montage song from Team America originated. And they, I think there's times where they can get it perfect. And I think their 2 movies are amazing. And I wish they'd make another one at some point, although I doubt they will.
And Sean, are there any other titles you want to bring up here towards the end?
No, I really wanted to revisit some of the bad ones and just to compare and contrast, but I didn't really get a chance to. I will say I'm just looking at the filmography of Pat Proft here. It's pretty impressive, at least for screenwriting. I think Wrongfully Accused is the only thing he directed, but this guy's got, he co-wrote Police Academy. He's got credits on, I think it's probably just character credits on most of those, but he's got a writing credit on the Star Wars Holiday Special. This guy has just been everywhere, done everything.
Holy cow! Well, he also worked on the Smothers Brothers show, which is something I always wanted to go back and
Party,
check out.
Real Genius, some good 80s comedies in here.
Oh, how can you forget High School High?
Yeah, saw that in theaters.
Yeah, I did too. I don't remember too much about it.
I got the poster. Do you want it? I'll send it.
No, that's okay.
Okay,
that's okay. All right. I wasn't too crazy about it. Man, Brain Donors. That's a movie I should go back to. That's essentially just like a total riff on the Marx Brothers, if I recall, with John Turturro. Have you guys seen Brain Donors?
It seems familiar. So. I don't think I saw it, but
it's pretty ridiculously great. It's again, throw everything against the wall, and it's pretty much a straight, I guess, a parody of like a Night of the Opera.
Frank, it's directed by Dennis Dugan.
Oh, did he? I think I did see that at some point. Yeah. I would be curious to check it out for sure. I definitely remember the poster or the movie cover at Jumbo Video when I was a kid.
Yeah, and as far as the Hot Shots movies go, again, hit and miss in terms of the jokes. I kind of get a kick out of something really ridiculous in the second one where Martin Sheen and Charlie Sheen cross paths as they're driving by one another and just point to each other and go, "I love you. I loved you in Wall Street." just for no reason, just because they were both in the same movie. It's just pretty random and ridiculous. They're kind of like doing a crossover between Rambo and Apocalypse Now in that moment. So it's again one of those like inside jokes if you're a movie fan that's kind of calling attention to itself, but I just find it kind of ridiculously charming. And you got Richard Crenna in there again, essentially, paying homage to his own character in a way, like doing a riff on his own Troutman character from Rambo. So, it's I think like the Saddam stuff is pretty dated and kind of dumb, but it's got its moments.
I was thinking that might be the case for the intro of Naked Gun as well, which is basically some of the political leaders that were at odds with America in the late 80s, but I think there was actually some okay gags. It's not amazing, but...
Yeah,
It's not
and
bad.
it's interesting to see how much Robert K. Weiss has contributed to the world of comedy as a producer. Like Blues
Yeah,
Brothers,
absolutely.
Amazon Women on the Moon, Naked Gun, UHF, of course, Nothing But Trouble, and Sliders. He was a co-creator on Sliders, which you gotta love, right?
Nice.
That's a show that should be remade. That would be interesting to see that updated with new effects. I think that would be. I kind of have a soft spot for that show. Has nothing to do with parody, but still, it's kind of charming in its own way. But yeah, so I don't know, man. I gotta say, I'm interested to see what David Zucker is working on. It's kind of just like, well, all I heard is that it's a film noir kind of parody thing. And I heard recently, although I think it's kind of gone into production limbo, that there was going to be another Frank Drebin spin-off with Ed Helms. Which,
yeah, I kind of remember hearing something about that. I don't know what happened to it, but that could be kind of interesting. I don't know.
He's not that old, actually. Like, when they were making the movies in the 80s, he was like in his 30s, essentially.
Yeah.
So I don't have a lot of hope for what he could output these days, but I hope it's something good.
Yeah, I mean, it's safe to say that this team had a huge influence in the world of comedy. I mean, obviously you had Mel Brooks, Carl Reiner, Chuck Jones, Woody Allen, Steve Martin, all played a huge role before and after. But this rapid fire style just was completely original for its time, and it's a source of nonstop hilarity for me, and kind of responsible for the development of my own sense of humor. And there wouldn't be a lot of certain sketch-based comedy, I think, without their contribution. And I think actually a recent example of their style working very well, although most people don't agree that I've heard anyway, is David Wayne's They Came Together. I
like that a lot.
Yeah,
actually.
I did too. I really, really thought that was fairly consistently funny. But again, you also had things like Movie 43 or the Scary Movie series.
Wow.
So, and whatever, Date Movie and all that crap has come out of there.
Now, speaking of like Police Squad and Naked Gun, did you guys like Sledgehammer when you were kids?
Sledgehammer.
Did anyone watch?
Vague memories of it. I don't think I really watched it that much,
know.
but that's something I would be interested to revisit.
I remember loving it when I was a kid, and it was kind of a cop parody show, probably more along the lines of a Dirty Harry parody. I think it only had one season, but
I just remember he sleeps with his gun, right?
Yeah, and it has like a sledgehammer on the grip, and I don't know why I loved this show when I was a kid. And I remember it came out on DVD eventually, and I bought it, and I was just like, "What?" It was one of those things that whenever I watched it on DVD, it did not live up to my expectations, but there's just not enough hours in the day, basically. I'm never going to have time to revisit Sledgehammer.
Yeah, so, I mean, we usually end the show here with, like, a top 3, but I don't really know how to go about doing this other than ranking the 3 Zaz films, I suppose. I mean, I guess if you want to include a Naked Gun sequel in there, I don't know if that's against the rules. But I guess like the top 3 parody films from any 3 of these guys, I guess we could just sort of rank.
Sure. I mean, pretty easy for me. I mean, number 1, Top Secret. Number 2, Naked Gun. Number 3, Airplane.
And number 1 for me is Top Secret. Number 2 is Airplane. And number 3 is Naked Gun.
And for me, it's Naked Gun. From the Files of the Police Squad, number 1, official title. Number 2, Airplane, and number 3, Top Secret.
Well, that went well. Great, that was easy.
On the topic of David Zucker, I just wanted to mention: did anybody see that An American Carol movie he did a few years ago?
No.
Do you know what it is? Even like, isn't this like sort of like a almost a conservative political comedy, something like that.
Oh yeah, I think I
It
remember
had,
hearing
like,
about this.
Kevin Farley in it, Kelsey Grammer. I never saw it, but I just remember it getting completely slammed by critics and stuff. And so if that's still the kind of stuff he's into, then maybe whatever he's working on, I'm not so excited about. But
Yeah. Well, we can only hope for the best from these guys. Maybe they'll put on a reunion tour.
yeah, they got to all get back together, not just Zucker on his own.
Yeah,
So.
I concur. Well, guys, thank you again so much for coming on the show. This was a blast, and as you know, I am chock full of gratitude for all that you guys do as creators of my favorite movie podcast. So again, it was an honor to talk with both of you about the art of comedy.
Thanks for having us. I mean, it was just a great excuse to rewatch some great movies that I haven't seen in a long time. So it was fun.
Yeah, it's nice to, because a lot of the directors I do cover here, I guess you would call are more along the serious side. So it's nice to binge on some comedies for a change, and it's nice to get away from the land of new releases, especially with this dreadful summer that we've had.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, and thanks again, Jim. And I would say, same with Sean. I hadn't watched these movies in quite some time, and it was a perfect excuse to revisit them.
Yeah, absolutely. So where can people find you both, I guess on Letterboxd and other wonderful places on the internet?
Well, filmjunk.com is the main place where you can find all our stuff. I'm at filmjunk on Twitter. Am I filmjunk on Letterboxd as well? I think so.
Yeah.
I think I am.
And Frank?
Twitter, Letterboxd are all Dirty Frank with 3 R's in dirty, and that's pretty much it.
Awesome. So for the next episode, I'll be joined by the incredibly intelligent Sergio Mims, who is just like a walking Wikipedia of film knowledge and film history. And we'll be diving into the world of Nicholas Ray, who directed Rebel Without a Cause, Bigger Than Life, In a Lonely Place, and so many other great classics. So stay tuned for that towards the end of the month. Like I said, please visit directorsclubpodcast.com. Send me an email at directorsclubpodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, for Frank and Sean of Film Junk, I am Jim Laskowski, and I bid you adieu.
I went to Paris in France, found a little romance. She was walking down the boulevard. I know I should have been good. I never thought that I would. Double cross and baby, cross my heart. Put a little rocking and a little wine. Got me thinking about a little Valentine. What's a lonely boy to do? She looks so fine. How silly can you get? Yeah, yeah. How silly can you get? Ooh, yeah. I never ever meant to slip. I wish you looked at me that way. The night was young and very made me forget. How silly can you get? Yeah, yeah. How silly.
Yeah, I think I was drinking Schlitz in Grand Rapids, Michigan at the time.
Nice.
Yeah. And my kitty kept coming into the closet where I was recording.